was such, and then at one time I was in such a bad situation personally and also company wise that I had to start calling my friends and guys, if you have any money, please give me some, like 50,000 or 10,000 or something. You know, this universe kind of helps you out if you're just wanting it so much. So I was just sitting there, I remember, and then this guy just comes in, very thin guy, comes in and says, I want to work with you. I said, dude, I don't have any money. I may not be able to feed you as well. And he said, I don't care. It's one of those things where, I did not know the opportunity before. We try to do exactly the opposite. Like, even if you have to fail at a customer end.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. My guest today is Abhinav Das, who's the co-founder and CEO of Orangewood Labs. Orangewood builds robotic arms. Now that sounds like straight out of a sci-fi movie. And perhaps it is. If you look at their products, it's out of the world. We talked to Abhinav about his journey of building and tinkering for over 15 years, some of the trials and tribulations he's faced, and then we delve into the nuances of building a hardware startup. How do you take to market? How do you commercialize? How do you build in a capital efficient way? So on and so forth. Aside from the many nuances on startup building that could be useful to you, I guarantee you that you will be super inspired from this conversation. My intention with the podcast was to help folks build better products and companies out of India. And I'm sure that this conversation will help do just that. I hope you like this conversation. And if you do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. So this is Abhinav Das of Orangewood Labs. Hey Abhinav, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here, and I'm glad we are doing this.
Yeah, man. I mean, we've been chatting for a couple of months. I'm really thrilled that you finally made it here, and we're talking. There's plenty that we can delve into: manufacturing, robotics, AI, so on and so forth. But I want to start this podcast with a few stories. Right? A few stories from your life and your journey. And I think that will kind of set the tone for everything that follows afterwards, right? So the first story I want to start with is with you out of college, writing your GATE exam. And then you have this sort of a what the F kind of moment, right? I mean, like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And so on and so forth. So can you just describe the circumstances around that and what it led to?
So I started my career, it actually started with an internship, and this was a government organization, which is called ICAT. And I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I'm very much an automotive person. My life's dream was to go and become a Formula One engineer. And I was trying to pursue that. And one of the opportunities which I had at the time was going and interning at ICAT, which was International Center for Automotive Technology. And they basically certify vehicles before, they come on roads. One of those agencies. And then post that, I was working for this company called Sona Koyo Steering Systems Limited, which is like a tier 1 supplier. Now they're called something else, but they were a steering system supplier to different OEMs. So if you're driving an Indian car, 80% of the chances are that you might be, holding a steering system which they've built. And while I was there, I was kind of getting bored. Like, there were things which they taught me, but then I think that there was a point, like within few months, it was pretty clear that, I've learned enough to do something else. And I was getting bored. And there was one time, one person introduced me to this thing called Jugaad. And and I've lived all my life in Delhi, where I always had transportation. There was a school bus, or there was the central Delhi transportation bus, so never really had transportation problems in like maybe the rest of the country faced. And this is like 2008. And he told me that, you should just go and check out, what's happening there. And previously, like in college, I'd build a car, build like a smaller There's this competition called Baha SAE where you basically engineering students come together and build a vehicle, and there's a racetrack where you have to do an endurance run. This happens in Indore every year, and we were in the first batch. So this 2007, 2008, and so I had like some experience of looking at it where group of students have built a vehicle which had to go through a very difficult terrain, which is not normal. And then, it was like good enough for those things. And then I went to the rural area. I saw this Jugaad vehicle, which had a pumps engine. It was extremely hard to sit on that. Right? I spent like maybe 15 minutes. I was having headache because there was like this engine who was throwing fumes on everyone who was sitting there. And then it was vibrating so much. And I found it very hard. Like, how do people even like travel on this? And then I started talking to the drivers and realized they don't actually make enough money. I mean, it's like, at that time, I think they were making like 1,000 rupees a month after putting in everything, all in. And I realized that's actually not enough for even back in 2008 for a family to survive. And one of the problems which they were facing was the fact that they did not have property rights to that vehicle. So they basically had to save 5 years of whatever they were doing, save 5 years of worth of money, and then buy one of these things, and then they don't have any property rights. So I came back from that village, and I was just thinking about this. I was
when
just
you say
sitting.
property rights, by that you mean that it's not a properly licensed vehicle
at
and
all.
so on and so forth.
It's
it could
illegal.
be like confiscated and
Anytime.
So on.
Illegal. So
Right.
I think there was this movie called 12th Pass recently.
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
There
12th
those,
Fail.
12th Fail, sorry.
Yeah.
So there, those two brothers were basically driving that.
Yeah. No, there's a version of that anywhere in India. North, south,
Exactly.
anywhere.
North, south, you have like, I think in Chennai, there used to be something called Meen Vandi. There was a version in Gujarat, which was called the Chakada. And some of these vehicles are also like, some of them are registered, some of them are not. But all of them are unsafe. And, it's kind of hard to imagine, this country produces so many mechanical engineers who are not able to get jobs. And there are like so many problems which mechanical engineers could fix. But, they're not fixing. They're not able to fix. So anyway, I think this idealist 22-year-old kid thought, like, I know how to build cars. If I go into, let's say, Formula One, maybe 20 years down the line, if, whatever happens, like if I just live out the best of my life, my whole achievement might be just, saving 1 second of a lap time for any of the best teams. Versus if I do this, this is like something which I have the knowledge for, and I can organize people to build something of this sort. I'll be able to change lives. And I think this kind of, like if you give a cause to some 22-year-old, it's, exactly. So that's what happened to me. And I was thinking about it, how do I do this? And obviously, I think by December, I'd left my job. Left or also laid off. I mean, that was it's funny that
2008 I can understand, right? I graduated around the same time, so I get the feeling.
Yeah.
I mean,
so 2008 it was. So I was given an option that either you stay, but we'll have to fire someone. And then there was other guy who actually wanted the job, and I was like, dude, I can just not spend another day here. And so I left, and one of the ideas was, okay, I told my parents, I'm going to write GATE. I think that's what everyone does. So I'm going to do MTech, get into something. And while this idea was like sitting, in my head, okay, what, you could make something of this sort. And then there was the GATE exam. I was writing it, and then there was like last 12 questions or so where you had to do some calculations. And I think I knew how to do them, and I don't think they allow calculators. So you have to do like, by hand. And I was like, dude, I don't want to do this. Right? I have 1 hour left. It wasn't that difficult of an exam. I don't want to do this. And it's like one of those times when you're like, you kind of know what you want.
Yeah.
Right? You have to go at some point, to realize. And it's like, oh no, I don't want to like spend another 2 years being in another college, right? Like that became very, very clear. So I just sat there and, I was just planning. And then I decided, yeah, I think let's find some places where who can help me out to go and build this truck which I want to build. So
Awesome. Yeah. I think, as they say, you should have something to run towards and run away from. Like that's the strongest combination, right? Okay. So after this, you go on to found Evolving Mobility, or Evomo.
Yes.
Right. You have a couple of folks with you. And then you move to Ahmedabad at some point of time. You start living in the NID hostel or nearby.
Nearby, yeah.
Nearby. Right. And then you have the situation where you're iterating on your prototype and whatnot, and you're living on $3,000 a month, right?
Yeah.
So tell us that story.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely, I mean, something which I would want to also talk about a little bit, though I don't want to sound discouraging, but I do feel that, the incubator system in India, which was like the university system, I don't think they're producing much. And, there's a problem between people who run them, they're not really entrepreneurs. So I think that's something which should
It's a
be
very
solved.
academic outlook.
I think they're bureaucrats. There's nothing wrong with them, but I think they're they're in wrong place. So for them to understand, what risk taking is, I don't think anyone understands that entrepreneurial risk taking, right? Like, why do you take certain decisions which might just sound counterintuitive and, might be like 40% of your burn for next 6 months, but then you have to take those shots. I think they'll never do that. Versus you as an entrepreneur knows, you'll have to take those kind of risks.
You have to take that leap.
Yeah. And I think for us, we were promised a certain amount of money. We never got that. And I mean, it was initially there, but, after that, like we got it to a point, but then after that, it was like, it's not going to happen. So this became hard. When you are, again, 22-year-old idealist, you think that, yeah, everything is going to work out. And then there is some like there's some support. There's like maybe 20% support. And then you're like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to get the rest of it. Which is how it should be working. But that did not happen. And, I was like I had like half a prototype. Like half the truck chassis, which I had built mostly. And then I had like few volunteers coming in. I'll also talk about that. And then, I could not build further. So it became difficult how to go ahead. And then I think that was a time which was a very dark period in my life, and also something which I'm really proud of. So I was one of those kids who never, if like 5 kids would go to canteen, there was one guy who will probably end up paying most. Even though that person may not be rich, I was that guy. Like I would not ask for money and, not ask for udhar or like anything. And then it was such, and then at one time I was in such a bad situation personally and also company wise that I had to start calling my friends and, guys, if you have any money, please give me some, like 50,000 or 10,000 or something. I think I still owe some people that much. I think the value of money has come down, so maybe they don't care much, or but I should definitely be returning them. But yeah, it's so, and that's how like we really ended up building the truck prototype. Another thing which happened, and that's something which I believe, like what I'd like to call as like it's almost magical, and almost every entrepreneur kind of goes through these times. When you start when you start walking, there is someone who gives you a lift. There's universe kind of helps you out if you're just wanting it so much. Yeah. And, I just found people. I just found people who will just come and volunteer. Like, one of my team members, I remember like I was just having chai at NID. There was this thing called Chai Gate where, they would just serve chai, and then, so I was just sitting there, I remember. And then this guy just comes in, very thin guy, comes in and says, I want to work with you. I said, dude, I don't have any money. I may not be able to feed you as well. And he said, I don't care. And then I found out that he was, he really wanted to get into automotive design, but he never got the chance. And I think there was, like in Indian universities, you have this thing that you need to have maths and, 12th standard to pursue automotive or architecture. And he did not have that. And because of that, he was kind of not allowed to sit for NID and few other places. He was very, very talented. And then he just came in and, we started working. So, wow. Yeah, I mean, it does happen. Like, people want to, I think most people are just trying to, protect themselves from this version of themselves who wants to go and build. So, it somehow comes out if you start building. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, I can actually attest to, the similar experience, right? I mean, random people just like being very generous. Sticking with this theme of kindness of strangers, absolute strangers in your life, right? Talk about moving on from Evomo perhaps, and the first 10K check that you got, and then the YC experience after that, right? I mean, talk about the post Ahmedabad journey.
Yeah, so I'll probably start with the time when I had to shut things down, and that was very, very hard, and I don't know, it's still, the way I have described it, it's like, killing your own child with your own hands. That's how I don't know, I don't have children, but, it was painful.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, I had this whole workshop full of things which I had to, like, for every tool I had to, like, maybe, beg, borrow. Everything was so hard to put together. And I had this whole workshop full of things, and I just had to give it away for liquidation. And I remember I had a prototype which I just had to leave. It was so hard. Like, it was just 3 years of hard labor. I mean, if you've seen the truck prototype, I had like 90% of the welding was me personally. So it was very, very hard. Sure. And I remember, there was a time when I created a plan where if I had like 1.5 lakh rupees, I would have built the next version, which was something which I could have actually put on roads. And I could not get that. I tried very hard. Like, I tried almost every friend. 1.5 lakh rupees doesn't seem like much right now, but this was in 2014, mid 2014, and I was just done. Like, I had to give up. It was very, very hard, and then I also came to a point, and then after that I got a call from Y Combinator. Like, we kind of created a new. Not an entity, but we created, like, I found new co-founders. I thought, let's create another version of this. I was trying to apply for YC, got into the interview stage. So first time got a chance to go to the US. We interviewed, we didn't get in. Also found out, like, this is a place where people might give you money. So I had this in the back of my head, but I also realized that, I have to do something else. Like, it started with this idea, Evomo started with this idea that, if I, like, it's fine if I'm as individual as Abhinav, is making sacrifices. End of the day, this is something which can pull people out of poverty. This is something which has the highest impact per unit suffering of Abhinav. So that was the idea. And, I kind of failed at that point of time and, failed to raise money. Failed to get it to the market. I remember I had like people calling me after years that, if you can get us one, we want to buy. And I felt very bad. Like, I kind of felt like failing them. But I realized that I have to move on. There was a time when, I realized that I wasn't growing. Neither the company is growing, and everything is at standstill, and I'm not done much.
And see, I've been through a similar situation, but, in the software world, I'm not actually looking at a product like in your case, right? And I'm sure that it would have been way worse for you, right? Actually seeing something physical, leaving that behind. But right? I mean, it's just that, but then that to digest that realization, I mean, it takes you a little while, right?
Yeah.
Until when you finally make that decision. And yeah, I mean, this was around 2016, 2015, 2016 time for me as well. Yeah, perhaps one of the hardest things I've done.
Yeah, and I think it was it it became clear that I want to do something else for some time. I did not have a holiday at all. Like I did not know what a holiday is, and I was just spending my time in California with my cousin at my cousin's place. So that was fun. Like after a very long time, I had like some
Just chill time.
yeah, such just chill time when I'm not doing much. So.
Right.
Kind of realized that maybe I'll do something else. Like let's just take some time and figure out. So I started taking some consulting gigs after that. Even more I had to shut down. I didn't realize I was also depressed at the time. Like now, if I look back, there are different signs how you show depression, and it's one of those things that I think it's as men or even as adults, we don't want to show out our emotions.
Yeah.
There are certain things which we just want to like push into like this small hole in our hearts or whatever, and we don't want to talk about this, and but you start showing different signs. So I remember like after spending some time in Bangalore, I went back to Delhi, where my parents are, took a gig. It was a nice gig, it was doing IoT stuff, which I really wanted to learn now. It was fun, but I was depressed. I would sleep like 12 hours a day. I was getting fat because I was just eating and sleeping and not doing much. And then I realized, it's one of those things where, there was this meme about, men will do something hard and not go to do a therapist. So this was my thing. Like, okay, men would do another hardware startup and not go to therapist. So I thought, like in hindsight, but at the time I thought, I think I should do that. I should do something else. Maybe this time do something easier, not like as hard as building a truck. And so me and my co-founders, we were talking about things, and one of the ideas was...
How do you meet your co-founders?
So we met at NID so in Ahmedabad. So in fact, both of my co-founders are Delhiites, just like me, who lived in Ahmedabad during that time. So Aditya was my roommate. He was a student at NID. And Akash was from our investor side. So he was investing from the CII, the IIM Ahmedabad incubator. So that's how I know them. And we used to like brainstorm a lot. Like this was one of those things we would just talk for hours for, how things work.
Right.
And it was fun, like, and we kind of got back together to discuss things. And at that time, like 2016, 17, it was like the time of co-working spaces. Every entrepreneur who was not doing any, like they were in between startups, they would do a co-working space. So like a lot of our peers were doing that. And, it kind of became clear that, if we can supply furniture to them. So after like trying a lot of things, one of the ideas at the time was also like building an electric e-rickshaw kind of a thing, a much better e-rickshaw. And then we thought, hey, that requires a lot more money.
Right.
I was very clear, I'm not going to go to any investor.
You were still carrying some trauma from the...
Yeah. And I was like, okay, if we have to build this, I know I can build this, but and we can obviously do it much better than anything else. But one, it requires a lot more money. So let's find something let's do a business which does not require so much money, so that we can use that money and then put in our automotive thing. So and that's how like furniture was kind of in our sweet spot. A lot of co-working spaces were coming up. So we were clear that, there's a market. And if we can supply them faster than anyone else, they'll come to us. So that was like the initial
genesis
thing.
Of the idea.
Yeah.
So Orangewood started with that, right? You wanted to build furniture and so on. At some point, you started like using CNC machines for that, right? And
we started with CNC machines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was also this idea that, how do you make it faster? So it was very clear that with other hand tools, you can only do certain things. And with CNC machine, you can do like intricate shapes, Theoretically, you have like a furniture piece within few hours if you don't have to finish things. So that was something very, very attractive for us. So IKEA wasn't in India at that time. And again, there was demand. So we built a CNC machine in my parents' basement and started making furniture out of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you explain the complexity of putting that CNC machine together? I mean, we had Kaushik Mugdha, who's the founder and CEO of Ethereal Machines, on the podcast some time back, and he spoke about it in some detail. But yeah, how does it all come together?
So I think I have huge respect for those guys. Like it's hard what we did, and I know like that's probably 10 or maybe 100 times harder than what they are doing. So this was just it was just like, imagine a 3D printer, but a very large 3D printer. And instead of printing, it's cutting, and it's only doing 2D space. So only flat pieces, and we used an open source design. Changed like couple of things just to have the material which was available. It was all jugaad. Like it had like I welded stuff together. There were nails going in, and we did that to save money and time. And then we were very confident. Like, yeah, this is dude. Everyone has been doing this. This would take just 15 days. What we didn't realize, and we both, at that time we were studying electronics. Like, even though we were engineers, but we were studying electronics just to refresh, and did not know like the circuitry needs to be upgraded for larger loads.
Right.
So things kept messing up, and then we had like piles of furniture pieces which could not be made, and you are always losing money, right? Like everything which doesn't get built, like it would the machine would lose signals at certain temperatures, and then we didn't have any thermal we basically did not do any thermal planning for that. So yeah, it kept failing, and I think I took 5 months. After 5 months, it worked. So
right. Yeah. How do you go from that to something like building robotic arms and so on?
So that was very need based. When we started scaling, we realized that it's not only cutting furniture which is the difficult part. It's also painting, the finishing part. That also needs to be done in a way which that also is like highly manual. And most of our painters would not come on time, or would not would not be like they'll not show up certain days, and there was high attrition there, and it was more than other things, and it became very clear that there's something wrong there. And when we understood like the problem, nobody wanted to paint, because it's one of those things which is you're basically inhaling fumes the whole day. That's what painters do. And that's why they are always looking for other opportunities, even though they might have gone to ITI or some trade school to learn that. If they get to drive for Swiggy or do something else, they'll do that. So it became very clear that this is a dying industry, and if we have to become a major furniture company, we have to solve this as well. And also out of engineers' curiosity, right? We built a robot for cutting pieces of wood. Let's do it for painting wood. And so we built a plywood prototype. It was for just $700, and we were like, yeah, this works. So
awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think there's just so much value in just tinkering, right? Otherwise, I mean, I feel like, where we are with the startup ecosystem, I think it's almost too sophisticated, right? Where we start with some kind of go-to-market already before you even think of product and so on. And I think that is necessary. On balance, I think it's a net positive. But yeah, I mean, I just miss the tinkering that there used to be in the early days, I feel, right? So, from here on, right, I mean, I just want to take a small tangent and talk about your SF experience versus what you were seeing in India at Ahmedabad and Delhi and so on, right? How is the air different in SF, right? What is the vibe different in SF? What do you learn from your YC experience that, you brought to bear in the second entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah. So one of the incidents I wanted to talk about, and I think that was your previous question as well. So I remember after demo day, and this was during the time when we were demoing the furniture idea. I remember post demo day, I was closing smaller checks on emails and phone calls. So previous time, 7-8 years of hard work in my 20s had to shut down for 1.5 lakh rupees. Over here, people were giving me money, over phone calls, over emails. I think the second person who our second investor, I actually did not talk to him like still maybe last year.
Wow.
Just send an email, dude. I liked your presentation. Let's do this. Let me put 10K. And I remember, like, I had tears in my eyes, right? Like, okay, so there was something wrong. And what I realized that, yes, there are certain places where things happen quickly. Um, there are like high trust environments. And I think Bangalore is kind of getting there. Yeah. But yeah, at that time, that wasn't the case. So I was doing, like, my previous company was in Ahmedabad, and, it wasn't the case there.
Right. So, what is your mission at this point of time? Because when you say robotic arms, right? I mean, obviously they could do a bunch of things. I see that you have about 4 or 5 different use cases. Like, what is your stated mission, and how are you sort of moving forward towards that?
It's one of those things where, I did not know the opportunity before. I think I kind of knew, like, okay, something might happen. I did
thought
not
it could
know.
be useful.
Yeah, I did not know, like, this is going to happen so soon. So we started playing with large language models, back in August, and back in August 2022, when we had like the GPT-3, and by April last year, we had what we call as the RoboGPT, where you basically tell a robot to do something, and it has been pre-trained on those certain tasks, and it can perform those tasks just by a natural language prompt. And that natural language prompt can be in any language. So it's almost like, you're communicating with a human to do something, and it's doing that. And I think for all of us, like, this idea of robots was essentially that, right? Like, we've seen robots in Terminator, we've seen robots in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And the idea of robots have always been around that. Like, you tell a robot to, clean my stuff or do something, and then they'll do that. But actually, like, the industrial robots are extremely hard to program. It's because of the robot math, and also about, like, how the robot industry has evolved over the years. And we wanted to change that. But now, like, there's a much bigger opportunity. I think there was like there was a video by Ilya, one of the co-founders of OpenAI, where he was talking about, like, why OpenAI kind of moved away from robotics. And he said that, if you have to do something in robotics, you have to become a robotics company. You have to commit to being a robotics company, and, then only you can do that. And we realized, okay, we've committed ourselves to doing that. And so there is a very good chance that, we are, like, now calling ourselves, or rather we are doing what we call as the path to AGI. And we are uniquely positioned to do that because, so currently, large language models are like, imagine a human who only can listen to words and maybe say words and does not have any sensory perceptions, right? That's how large language models are. But with robots, you can have more senses. They can basically, take this glass up and see what is happening, form experiences the way humans do. There's a chance you can program large language models to do that.
Fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we are the company who can do this now, because we are the ones who are, building robots, building the right hardware, doing the hard thing.
Right.
So yeah, that just brings us to, like, this very, interesting inflection point. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, it's a lot more tangible, right?
We never thought, right? Like, this wasn't like the 2019 Orangewood.
Yeah.
We never knew this would happen, but now it is happening.
Right. So, if I were to think of building an MVP in SaaS, right? I mean, it's fairly, benchmarked right now. You know what to do, right? I mean, you could perhaps use some no-code tools, and then get it up and running very quickly, right? But if someone is sort of evaluating an idea in hardware, or thinking of something to do with robotics and so on, right? How does someone go from idea to product to company?
One of the things which we do is, like, there is this urge to keep things in the lab, right? As engineers, we try to do exactly the opposite. Like, even if you have to fail at a customer end, you have to do that. Even if it's embarrassing for you, even if they might make some losses, like you might have to pay from your pocket.
Right.
If they ask, though nobody has asked us now till date, but uh, even if that is the case, you still have to do that. You still have to go out there and be embarrassed. Be embarrassed about your robots. Be embarrassed about your machines, and then keep doing that. And then that would help you to be very, very driven towards building the right thing. I think as engineers, we want to like build the perfect product in our heads, and that does create a lot of problems. I mean, I think YC also kind of teaches you the same thing. They want you to like go and talk to as many customers as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, I'm sure that it's easier today relative to when you started out, right? Now, if I were to build an application, right, I'm not building the infra, I'm not building the security, I'm not building a bunch of things, right? Perhaps, I mean, my app has some messaging layer. I mean, I can just integrate some stuff, right? And I'm, of course, leveraging like 1,000 libraries, whatever, right, to code and so on and so forth. You think you're probably getting there with hardware as well, with robotics, in terms of like being more modular to sort of assemble and like ship?
I wish it was the case. At least on paper it is. So, but yeah, we're not there yet. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, it's a hard problem.
and I think it's because it's not because nobody has tried. It's because for the longest time I think the robotics industry was not attracting the best software engineers. I think now that has changed, and I think within few years you'll see like a drastic change. Something which hasn't happened in 20 years is going to happen like maybe next 2.
Right. And what do you think has caused that change? What do you think is the inflection point?
So large language models, definitely. Right. I think the ability to write the best kind of code has become much easier. The barrier to entry has become much less, like much lower. So that would definitely be helpful. And second, I think now I think we are at that point where people want to solve hard problems. Like I think 2 years back, it was very hard to find, good CS people for our company. Now, like it's completely different. Like I don't know, like what has happened, but people want to solve those hard problems, and like CS engineers, who would not even maybe talk to us. Now they want to help us build this. Yeah. So I think that change has happened.
I think so too. I mean, I just like perceive it, right? Because obviously we do this podcast, and we've been doing this for about 4 years, spoken to about 200 plus founders, and so on and so forth. And just in the type of requests that we get to, in terms of who we should host, what we should cover, and so on and so forth, I think there's a deep interest for hardware, for cutting edge stuff, right? I mean, it used to be the case for consumer internet at some point, then SaaS, and now, I mean, everything is about, hey, robotics or AI or something like that. People have become super curious about it, and also what is also helpful is that they're seeing live examples of either you or someone like Kaushik or even folks like Attenberg, right? I mean, building a fan here, right? And competing with like a Havells, which is perhaps 11,000 crore business, right? And actually taking market share away from them, right? Kick-ass stories, right?
Absolutely.
People are actually seeing those successes, and they're getting a little more confidence that, hey, you know what, this is something that I know it's hard, it's challenging, but it's not out of reach.
Yeah, I mean, see, if you look at like the Indian manufacturing history, we've done these things before.
Yeah.
And like, it's, it is just that this mindset which needs to change. We don't have to like, we just don't have to like think that these are not the kind of things which are worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And Attenberg is like a very good example, right? Like this is brushless DC motors. They have existed for a while. They don't exist in fans, and now let's make fans out of them. So it's just the one of those ideas, which if it scales so beautifully. Yeah. And say, I think we should also talk about their success, how much energy they are saving for India, right? Like that's such a huge thing.
Yeah. We had Arindam of Attenberg on the podcast. You guys should check it out if you haven't. We've produced bloody good civil and mechanical engineers, right? At some point of time, I mean, I think software became the path of least resistance for a lot of us. I mean, you can't really, we've benefited immensely out of that for sure, right? But Yeah, but I think I definitely see that change happening. From a manufacturing perspective, right? And here, Mr. Protospinks on Twitter keeps talking about the need for a vibe shift to manufacturing, right? So, and I perceive that as well. I think that, we definitely should start, like for India to grow, I think all levers have to work, right? I mean, your services, your manufacturing, you can't like neglect one thing or like, not prioritize it. And manufacturing is a core need, not just from an economy perspective, but even from a self-sufficiency, like a security perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you think has to happen to sort of like get us like, going on the manufacturing front?
I think we need to start more companies. And this was, I think 2 years back, I had like this theory that, why we cannot find good hardware electronics engineers. Why it is so hard. So you do get like good CS engineers, you get good mechanical engineers also. And after like a lot of discussions with my friends and some of the people who have been doing this for a while, who are electronics engineers or have either moved abroad or like doing some PhD or something else, like what I was able to understand was that, because this is an industry which has moved much faster than, let's say, the industrial or mechanical industry, or and it requires certain infrastructure. It becomes very hard, like unless you have companies which are global scale companies. If something would have started in 2005 in India, let's say, imagine, something like Samsung or even Xiaomi would have started in 2005, there would have been a trickle down effect of, using those same engineering standards in your local engineering colleges. They would have learned those skills. This happened with the mechanical engineering because of Maruti, because they got Suzuki in, and then we understood so much from the Japanese ecosystem. The same thing did not happen for the electronics industry. So that's why you never had, people starting great companies which would keep giving jobs to other people, and then there were no competitors. So, that's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
I think now that is changing. There are like so many good consumer electronics companies which are just, they've started like in India now.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to change like next 5-6 years.
Yeah. No, there's that huge theme, right, of electronic manufacturing services and so on. We're assembling stuff, and hopefully, from there on, we'll head to design and whatnot, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
It's a sort of a natural process of evolution in that sense, right? So the other part is in terms of commercialization, right? I mean, because we've been talking about from a builder's mindset. Now, if I want to commercialize my product or service, right? And it's definitely harder on in terms of hardware and so on, right? But do you have any thoughts in terms of what people should do to make that a little more, more practical and hedge some risks as such?
Yeah, so one of the things is like, again, like the methodology which we use at Orangewood is just go and work with your customers. Just visit them, talk to them, understand what their pains are. You start forming a very clear picture what they want. What is their main pain point. So for us, a lot of our customers, be it like very large, be it in India or US, the biggest problem of our customers is that, they cannot find more people to do blue collar labor. They cannot find, enough people. Most of their workforce is either retiring or getting too old or getting,
finding other avenues.
Exactly. Right. So it's, I think this is like the biggest pain point, and this is a much larger trend. So it becomes very easy for us to like, walking into anywhere and then talking about it. Yeah, this is what the robot can do. For I think everyone else, we need to like be fine with like getting rejected. And also, like, as as individuals, we should stop taking ourselves too seriously. Like, that's one of those things. Just do it for the process of doing it, right? For like, build a prototype, go and show it to people, go and show it to like 5 factories or whoever you are building it for.
Right.
If they like it, if they're ready to pay for it, start selling it. I think
Right.
that's how easy it needs to be. Apart from like, obviously, there are times when things which are a little bit dangerous, you should obviously take care of the safety and other things. But try to like have more action orientation, right? Like get the product out no matter what happens. Like it will fail. Like be fine with failing. I think that's, as a society, we need to do that. Like we need to be fine with failing more.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's actually like a very tangible cost to failure with hardware, right? I mean, it's not like software where, you're told to fail fast and yeah, hey, I mean, it's going to crash, but then, you're going to put some patch, run a fix, and then like, you're good with the next version in no time almost, right? I mean, here you're talking about like, not bits and bytes. I mean, bits and bytes, but also like hard things, right? So in that case, I mean, how do you kind of iterate and stay innovative?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen this happening again and again. We've like, as a company, we've ran out of money. We've been credit card debt. We've seen like really hard times as a company, and like for us, the only thing like which, again, I'll go back to my own enthusiasm about, okay, the Abhinav suffering is lesser than, let's say,
Right.
the whole world, which like the shape of the world which will be creating, or the impact which we'll be creating. I think I actually don't have any answer. I don't know, like, because the capital, I don't know if it exists right now in India or not.
Yeah.
But I think it's better now, much better. I think this Shark Tank, right? Like, I think most entrepreneurs are respected more because of Shark Tank. Oh, yeah. My mother was asking me of market cap and things, Like, so I think that's changed.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think we still have to like do that hard work. I think there's this particular generation, next 5 to 6 years, still have to keep doing this and create examples.
Yeah.
You can be good at it. I think Twitter is one place where you could actually reach out to people for help, and this has been happening. I mean, I'm surprised. Like, I'm very pleasantly surprised how many people just come out and help for things.
Yeah. No, startups are truly mainstream. I mean, like, I remember when we started 15 years back or whatever, right? I mean, even 2 years into my job, my mom would tell me about this uncle who could refer me to, some job in IBM or Infosys or whatever, right? I mean, it was just, startups were just like a small company. I mean, you just like worked there because you didn't want a real job, so to speak, right? So, I mean, no one took you seriously, right? Whether it's your landlords or prospective father-in-laws, to now where, because of Shark Tank and whatnot, it's become living room conversation, right? Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to what happens over the next 5, 10, 15 years, man, because I think like really like there are massive opportunities in India. And it's going to be in the hardware realm, I think.
Absolutely. And India is very uniquely positioned. And, for us, like, we are a US headquartered company. But still, like, we invest a lot of money, like, in India, and the reason for that is I think we are very uniquely positioned in terms of what we can do here. We are actually, if you look at just like, if you're just looking at the labor cost, it's actually cheaper in India now. You do find those trained people and who can work at a much lower rate than in China.
Right.
So those things are already happening, and not just that. I think it's also about this part where Indians actually have to prove ourselves. Like that energy itself is not getting tapped in somewhere. And I do feel like we find ourselves lucky because we do have people who who have joined us at a whatever they were being offered in different companies at a much lower pay scale.
Yeah, I think I mean it's so important to make something cool, right? Because look, I'm an instrumentation engineer. I survived all of 3 months in the refinery, right? Because unlike my batchmates and friends who were in AC halls and like coding away, right? I mean, I had to like push switches and pull levers and stuff in like 40 degrees heat, right? And what was I doing? I mean, heck, I mean, I couldn't see what was the impact of what I did, right? Versus, I mean, these guys who are actually seeing something, at least something tangible. But whereas, I mean, when I think about this, right, I mean that I'm actually creating a robotic arm, right? I mean, that I think makes it cool, right? That makes a lot of people like say that, okay, you know what? Screw it. I mean, like, let me just give this a shot at least.
Absolutely. And, I was having a discussion with, why do we do stuff like this? There are videos which we keep releasing.
Right.
And, you cannot be like a boring engineering company, right? Like for us, that's really important. It's really important that it's doing like the Diwali puja and, like maybe
Cutting
doing.
cakes and-
Yeah, exactly. It's necessary for us to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this conversation around, okay, I mean, most of Elon Musk companies are really cool. And then, they have this thing where, they just shot like...
He builds a flamethrower.
Exactly.
Just for kicks.
Yeah. And then, they just throw like a Tesla Roadster in space. Like imagine having that conversation in NASA, right? Like what would happen? But that's kind of makes it cool. And you need to keep that. And that's something which keeps our spirits really high.
Yeah. No, you need to have that tinkerer spirit, right? I mean, you need to have that, like, do things for shits and giggles also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you have coming up at Orangewood? What are you most excited for over the next, 18 months or so?
I think it's the AGI. Like you'll start seeing things which are, kind of scary and cool, which, I mean, there are times when, and it's also about large language models, right? Like they are able to do things which are like scary and cool. So when you have working that with a robot, it just becomes, something which you saw in sci-fi. It kind of happens in front of your eyes. And this has been happening in our labs for some time where, we have systems where like two robots can talk to each other to help each other out.
Right.
We are doing experiments on these things. Obviously, it's not safe yet to be out there in a factory.
Right.
But it's getting very, very interesting. And you'll see a lot of interesting things happening over the next 18 months.
Yeah. I mean, so if you guys haven't watched this video, go see this Boston Dynamics video of their progress over 10 years or something. It's just freaking mind-blowing. Right? It's crazy. I mean, where things were even 10 years back and where we are right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that kind of led to, they are like the symbol of robotics. Like for our generation, it was Terminator or Star Wars. And now for the next generation is the Boston Dynamics dog. And that has inspired so many other companies to build something similar.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, man. I think we've covered plenty of facets. But if you were to sort of end this with your advice for maybe people who are contemplating, building something in the hardware world, right? Perhaps some robotic startup, etc. What are 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would offer to them?
I'll say just start building, start tinkering. It's going to be anyway long and hard, and
always harder than you think, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be a quest, it's going to be an adventure, and you can't decide, okay, this is like a safe adventure and this is unsafe. You will have to commit to it, but just start building, that has the best outcome. You get to learn so much, and in a way we want to see what is going to happen, right? That's why we tinker. That's why we as humans we are really curious. What happens next? What if I do these things? What if I push this code? What if I make this circuit? The best way is to do that.
Yeah. What if I shoot arrows at the Cybertruck?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that's like $1 trillion company.
Oh man, insane. Yeah. So any books or podcasts that you would recommend to the audience?
I've the recent book I've read is the Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminded me of myself when I was graduating. I used to think exactly like that. And this idea of use first principle thinking. And that has so many instances. The whole book is full of instances where Elon Musk kind of pushed apart some pseudo rule or some kind of
conventional wisdom.
Yeah, to do things, and that has basically made his companies what they are. Obviously, things do get messed up in a very, very, very big way. but then there's net positive in the society. So I think that's worth it.
Yeah. No, there is something to asking very first principles questions about like really large fundamental things, right? Like Tesla, for example, or SpaceX or Neuralink. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you get to that with very linear incremental thinking, right? Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Hey, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I think the work that you're doing is so inspiring. Right, your journey is inspiring, and I hope that people who are watching or listening to this are inspired to start their own Orangewoods. Right, and yeah. Hey, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. It was a superb discussion. So thanks for tuning in, folks. I'll see you on another episode of the Startup Operator podcast with another interesting entrepreneur. And if you like this content, don't forget to share, subscribe, do all of the good stuff. I'll see you soon.